Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we are looking at my Week 2 predictions for the 5 biggest games this week. As always, be sure to hit the other O&O Sports accounts all across social media and find the pinned post on each of those profiles to enter in my 75 or die giveaway. If I go under 75% on my picks this year, you get $100, and either way, if you win, you get $50. It's literally free money. Be sure to go over there and get into that. And starting off week 2, we have SMU minus 2.5 versus the Baylor Bears. FanDuel has this game at about 34-31 in favor of the Mustangs. And simply put, in this matchup, Baylor has to figure out a way to stop the rush. Last year, Kevin Jennings was a very solid dual threat quarterback. Over 350 yards on the ground with 5 touchdowns. And he wasn't the biggest factor on the ground, definitely not to the extent that Jackson Arnold was last week, but he still has that ability, and Rhett Lashley is going to know that. He might try to utilize Kevin Jennings' legs a little bit more in this game. And on the opposite side, SMU has to figure out how to stop the pass this week. Last week, faced Eastern Texas A&M, an FCS school, and they gained 350 yards of total offense, 240 of those coming through the air, and that does not lend to my confidence well in this one, especially seeing how well Sawyer Robertson performed last week. He could be one of, if not the best quarterback in the Big 12 this year, and he's going to be able to spread the ball around. He got 8 different receivers receptions last week against Auburn, and as always, this game is going to come down to who can exploit whose weaknesses more, and I think that team is going to be Baylor. I have the Bears winning this one 38-34. I wasn't particularly impressed with SMU's defense last week. They didn't play bad, but would like to have seen a little bit more, especially going against an opponent like Eastern Texas A&M. Simply put, I trust Sawyer Robertson and his weapons more than Kevin Jennings and his. And for the next game, it is Iowa State versus Iowa. Iowa State being the 2.5 point favorite in this one, which means FanDuel has this finishing at about 23-20 in favor of the Cyclones. And I think Vegas hit the nail on the head there. Iowa's pass offense once again looked miserable against FCS Albany last week, and it's looking like Iowa's going to be typical Iowa again this year, gonna live and die on the ground and through special teams and field positioning again this year. But I'm not as confident in Iowa's ground game this year as I have been the past few years. And on top of that, Iowa State faced off against a pretty capable Kansas State rushing offense 2 weeks ago in week 0 and held them to just 4 yards per carry. I believe Iowa will be able to run the ball just out of necessity alone, but I think Iowa State gives them a little bit of trouble in that aspect for at least 2 or 3 quarters of this game. And in terms of special teams, Iowa State has Kyle Conradi, who hit a 63-yard field goal last week. I really like him to be a difference maker in this game like he was last year. If you remember last year in this game, Conradi hits the game-winning walk-off field goal against the Hawkeyes in Kinnick. And I think Iowa State is more than capable of lowering themselves to Iowa's level, for lack of a better phrase. And I think they do it again with Ames behind them. I have the Iowa State Cyclones winning 20-16 in this matchup. And the over-under on this matchup is 41.5, but I might go ahead and lock in one of my best bets this week being that under. I have it at 36. Vegas has it at 41.5. I really like that in all honesty. And the next game is going to be Duke versus Illinois, who is once again a 2.5 point favorite. 3 2.5 point favorites so far. This is going to be a tight week of football. FanDuel has Illinois winning this one 27-24, and this is the first real test for both of these teams. And the biggest difference between these two squads is one of these teams is going to be very explosive and one is going to be hyper efficient. Illinois, of course, is going to be the efficient one, led by Luke Altmaier. Last week, 81% passing for 217 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 215 passer efficiency rating. They also had 200 yards on the ground for 5.6 yards per attempt. That's going to be the Illinois brand. They're going to take what you give them, and they're not going to be flashy while doing it, which is the exact opposite of what Duke is this year. They bring in Tulane transfer Darian Mensah, who last week threw the ball for a 79% completion percentage, almost 400 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. They also ran the ball very well, but a lot less than Illinois did. 160 yards on the ground for 6.4 yards per carry. And this one really comes down to a coin flip, really. Which do you like more, explosivity or efficiency? And I am always going to choose efficiency. I like Illinois to win this one 30-28 in a very close matchup. And I like this mostly because Duke started off very slow against Elon last week. They were tied at halftime, and I believe that could happen again. I think if Illinois grabs an early lead and forces Duke to play from behind, that opens up Duke to forcing the ball down the field, and I think that leads to a turnover or two, which gives Illinois the edge in this one. one. And the next game is Missouri, who is a 6.5-point favorite over the Kansas Jayhawks. FanDuel has this one at Missouri winning about 28-21, and this is one of the most interesting matchups this week, in my opinion. Missouri is going to be the more talented team, but Kansas has the X factor in this game, the real game breaker player on either of these teams, and that is Jalen Daniels. And the Kansas offense has been rolling so far this year. They go out and beat Fresno State in week 0, and they hold them to 7 points with 216 total yards in the game. But then Fresno State goes out and scores 42 on Georgia Southern with 527 total yards, which I think lends to Kansas's defensive favorability in this matchup. And Missouri is another team that started off a bit slow last week against Central Arkansas. Not nearly as slow as Duke, but still not exactly what you wanted to see from them to start the game. But with that being said, they have absolute playmakers all over the field. Bo Pribula last week, 82% passing for 340 yards and 4 touchdowns. Ahmad Hardy, the ULM transfer, 10 carries for 100 yards and a touchdown. That's 10 yards per carry. And the wide receiver Marquise Johnson, 5 receptions, 130 yards and a touchdown. And inevitably in this game, I have Missouri's defense making some big plays in this one to give Missouri the victory here, 34-30. I think it'll be a lot closer though than Vegas is expecting. And people will say, it's Kansas. How are you struggling against Kansas as an SEC team? And I think that's a bit unfair. I think Kansas could be a 7-9 win team in the Big 12, maybe even better if the defense is as good as I think it may be. I just think Missouri is going to out-talent the Jayhawks in this one. And for the last game of the week, the biggest game this week overall, it's Oklahoma as a 5.5-point favorite versus Michigan. FanDuel has this game at about 26-20 in favor of the Sooners. And I completely understand where this line is at. Michigan looked good last week against New Mexico, didn't look great. Bryce Underwood performed about as well as you could expect. The ground game was there, but the defense did give up a couple plays through the air and on the ground in this one to a New Mexico team that is completely outmatched in that game. They didn't make enough plays to really make it an interesting ball game, but it was enough to cause concern in my opinion. And I think the red zone defense for Michigan was especially a big concern. New Mexico reached the red zone approximately twice in this matchup, and they scored touchdowns both of those times. But the issues for both of these teams weren't just with Michigan. OU struggled a little bit this past week as well. They were outgained on the ground by Illinois State. Now I know Oklahoma's not a huge rush offense, but they have Jaden Knott. They have a couple of dudes in that backfield who I think should have easily been able to outgain Illinois State. They also lost a turnover battle in this one, 0-2. Now it didn't end up mattering because that pass offense is so explosive and they were able to get all the points back, but still a bit of a concern. But I think the biggest X factor in this matchup is Oklahoma's defense. They performed very well last week against Illinois State. I have to say that they weren't a good team, but still a very good performance. 150 total yards allowed this game, 1 for 11 allowed on third down, 1.7 yards per pass, and 4.5 yards per rush. And I think the Oklahoma defense is actually what comes out and wins this matchup for the Sooners. I think Michigan is able to run the ball very effectively on this Oklahoma defense, but Mateer is going to be able to make the bigger plays through the air. I have Oklahoma winning 24-20, and I would say Michigan has the edge defensively, and that might be what causes a potential upset here, but I honestly think both of these defenses are closer to even than they are to being in Michigan's favor. Last year, Michigan's defense, great. This year, started off a bit slow. It might just be that it was week 1 and everybody kind of sucks in week 1, but I didn't love how they looked last week in all honesty. I like Michigan long-term, and I like the defense long-term, but I think the red zone defense does catch up to them in this one, and I think the Sooners win this matchup. And with that, thank you for watching. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. Go ahead and get entered to the 75 or die giveaway. The winner will be announced after the Army-Navy game, and I will see you in the next one.